Welcome to Human Risk, a podcast dedicated to the understanding of human behaviour as a risk. Here's your host, Christian Hunt.
Hello and welcome back to the Human Risk podcast. In this series, I speak to people that can help us to understand the drivers of human decision making and what we can do to mitigate the bad outcomes that often result from it. Now, it might surprise you to learn that my guest this time, Leanne Spencer, isn't a specialist on the mind. She's actually a specialist on the body. She deals in wellness, i.e. physical well-being. There is a strong linkage between physical health and mental health. And one of my listeners, many thanks Julia, thought it would be a good idea for me to have a discussion with someone that can draw this stuff out. Leanne is a professional in the corporate well-being space. She's also an author and a podcaster in her own right. Links to her books and her podcast in the show notes. During our discussion, I wanted to pick up this linkage between physical and mental health, and also to look at some of the ways that we can help to combat the challenges that we're facing in what are, after all, very stressful times. So one of the things that we look at is some of the new technologies that are out there that can help us better manage our well-being. It's a fascinating conversation that I learn a heck of a lot from. So please enjoy my conversation with Leanne Spencer on well-being. Leanne, welcome to the Human Risk podcast.
Christian, thank you for having me.
Listen, it's an absolute pleasure to have you here. And as I do with all my guests, can you just sort of tell my listeners a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Yes, so I do quite a few things, actually. We're going to talk a bit about well-being, I presume, and I do think varieties are an important part of well-being. So my main gig is I run a company called Bodyshot Performance. We're about 6 years old, we're 8 people, and we use wearable technology and science-based solutions to create happy, healthy and resilient teams. Work with companies like Britvic, with ILM, a subsidiary of Disney, iTech Media, a very fast-growing tech company, Medical Research Network, names you'd have heard of, names you might not have done. That's the kind of thing we do is workshops, we provide health coaching, but we're a little bit different. I won't go into the whole pitch because that's not what you've asked for. But we tend, as I indicated, we use wearable tech, we use science-backed solutions, little things like the Oura Ring, things like the First Beat, to get personalised insight. So that's where we're a little bit different. That's the main gig. And then I also, over lockdown, did a bit of work on a construction site to help a friend out, which was not my natural habitat. So I did say variety. So I learned to plasterboard, bit of dead wiring,
wow,
floorboarding, all sorts, actually. It was really quite fun, grubby work, but quite fun. Anyway, that's just a small side note. I'm a Bear Grylls survival instructor as well. So I've got qualified a few months ago, having done their flagship Survive the Highlands course almost a year ago to the day, and thought, actually, I wouldn't mind being a survival instructor. It picked up some great skills. I mean, how practical they are for urban life, probably not very, but I think this could be something about getting people outdoors, getting companies and teams outside and teaching them these skills, because that may be the only place that you can get people together. So it may be more appropriate than ever. But that's the main stuff that I do.
Wow. I mean, that's really interesting because it's sort of kind of back to basic stuff, right? So you've got the sort of the contact with the physical world, but actually even kind of construction is all around a basic skill set that takes us away from some of the more sort of cognitive pieces there. So this. I mean, this all sort of neatly fits together. And as you say, in the COVID environment where we are to a certain extent retreating into sort of some of the things that we took for granted have clearly been shown to us. So I think that's a really sort of interesting pivot in this time to grab some of those sort of historic disciplines and trades that possibly actually you wouldn't naturally learn nowadays. But I don't know, go back a few hundred years and you would have done.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do think it's relevant. As I say, I think variety is an important part of well-being, but also just these sort of learning new skills. I think that's an important part of it. Getting away from just the main factor. I think a lot of people can find themselves in a velvet rut where they've leveraged themselves into these high positions or these decent salaries. And it's velvet because they're earning nice money and they've got nice things around them, but it's still a rut. They bounce off the sides and it feels all silky, but they're still bouncing off the sides of something. And I think a lot of people can find themselves in that kind of position. And it's important to do other things. You find that actually the convergent pressures of work and home have meant that you don't do anything else but those two things. And just taking a step out if you can and learning something new or reconnecting with something you used to love when you were a young girl or a young boy And I love the outdoors and I love those sort of skills, and then sort of lost them and lost the confidence for it. And that little bit of construction stuff that I did, it proved to me that actually I can do something, just a silly thing. Like I'm looking down the garden at the moment at the ring alarm. I put that on the wall. A year ago, I'd have got someone around to do that. It's empowering. And that, again, it's part of well-being. It's about self-esteem, isn't it? Confidence and being empowered to have a go at stuff and get into your discomfort zone.
And when we you use the term well-being, how do you, if I say, I'm not solicitors going to say define it 100%, but sort of, what do you mean by that? Because there's a sort of, there are so many aspects of it, whether it's physical or mental. Are you covering the full spectrum in that, or are you thinking of specific elements of it?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I mean, I don't have a sort of, there you go, there's the definition. I think it encapsulates lots of different interconnected elements. So for me, it's about sleep, it's about mental health, it's about energy, the people, places, things that energize you. It's also about things like body composition, fat and muscle predominantly. Your digestive health is an increasingly important part of well-being. Some of your listeners may or may not be aware of. And then your overall fitness for the rigors of daily life and the rigors of business life. So less about how fast can you run and how heavy can you lift, but functional fitness, like when you have a suitcase on the carousel at the airport, can you lift it on and off? Can you mobilize quickly if you need to, run away from something or run towards a bus or something like that? Can you lift your kids without hurting yourself? Can you chase them around the garden without hurting yourself? So that's the kind of thing from a physical standpoint. So I think well-being is all those elements, and all of those, you can pull out other elements from that collection of elements like resilience and immune health and immunity in other regards as well. And yes, COVID, of course, is very relevant to that, but there are lots of bugs and germs and viruses floating around in air quotes normal times as well that we don't ideally want to be falling prey to. So I think at the moment the really topical aspects of well-being are probably mental health, resilience and immune health. The interesting one that we could talk about is gut health and all of that. And what we're starting to understand now, functional medicine has understood for quite a while, but we're just starting to understand is that health originates in the gut. So yeah, sleep's important, but the bacteria we have in our gut can affect how we sleep. It's basically this delicate ecosystem of bacteria that we call the microbiome is arguably in charge of the entire body. That's what some scientists now believe. It's the first brain.
And I definitely want to explore that because I a couple of years ago, it's probably 3 or 4 now, but COVID time, who knows? I had an appendectomy and I sort of had a pain with it and then went in. And so I was kind of fat. What is this thing they've taken out of my body? And having already had my tonsils removed at a young age, I was like, they are slowly but surely stripping me of parts that must have served a purpose at one time. And so I was fascinated by this thing. And of course, we all talk about gut reactions to things. Yeah. And we sort of know what we mean by it. But most people, when they talk about that, they apart from when you feel a bit queasy because you're embarrassed or awkward, or generally people don't think about that as the physical part of the body. And I read this book which you must have read by Julia Enders. Called Gut, which is this, for listeners who haven't seen this, I'll put it in the show notes, is this amazing, I think she was 16 or 17 when she had a skin problem. Doctors couldn't cure it, so she does what all normal 16, 17-year-olds do. I will investigate for myself, and then wrote this book on it, which has been sort of, but so I kind of dived into this thing, and I agree with you. I think this is really fascinating. And if you and so beyond the word gut as a sort of gut instinct, and maybe those adverts for macrobiotic yogurts and probiotics, those sorts of, that's about as far as the average person gets. But this is really key to how we operate.
It is. I mean, that book, just to give it a plug, is brilliant by Julia Enders. I have a podcast as well, and I, at the time, was doing interview-style shows, which I'm not at the moment. I tried to get her on. I don't know if you've had a go, but you cannot find any contact information for this woman at all. Nothing. She just doesn't want to be got hold of. So, but it's a great book. What we reasonably well about some bacteria is that there's fairly strong links to depression. So researchers took the bacteria they believed that was an aspect of depressive state, and they injected it into germ-free sterile mice, and they exhibited the signs of depression, and then they took the bacteria out and they reverted back to their previous type. I don't want to say the word normal, but their previous state. They did the same with bacteria they believed caused obesity, and the mice grew bigger, and then they reverted back to their previous state. There are much more tenuous links to reduction of cardiovascular disease and also cancer, but very tenuous early stage links. There are links with rheumatoid arthritis and other autoimmune conditions and asthma and eczema. So it's really fascinating. And we think that there are, in general, what's important is to have a good diversity of bacteria. It's okay to have some of the air quotes bad stuff, as long as it doesn't overpopulate. I suppose it's like our average community. We can tolerate a few bad apples, pinching stuff, and we can sort of tolerate that as long as there aren't too many of them. There's enough goodies to outnumber the baddies. And I suppose our bacteria is a little bit like that. But it's a really interesting area. And a functional medicine practitioner, if you go to them with depression or headaches or something, they will start with the gut. They'll take a stool test, they'll look at the gut, they'll look at the types of bacteria and the prevalence of those bacteria, and then take it from there. Whereas traditional medicine, you go in with a cardiovascular problem, you'll get a cardiovascular specialist. You go with a throat issue, you get an ENT specialist. And then now starting to realise that health is deeply interconnected, and maybe looking at it that way is a better approach.
Well, the bit I find really fascinating is this harks back to way back when. So if I look at something like sauerkraut as a thing, which is really good for your gut, but it's fascinating because I would always put that in the box of, okay, this comes from an era when food supply was limited, so you have to preserve everything you've got. So the reason they preserve it this way is because it's protecting the food supply when you might not be able to get any others. So it's a primeval thing that just serves that purpose. It's a storage function, if you like. And actually, when you start to look at some of the kimchi is another one, you look at all these things and you go, these things that have been used for what I thought were other purposes actually were tremendously powerful. So our kind of ancestors knew something and evolved foodstuffs that played with that dynamic, which I find absolutely, so this isn't just a sort of modern dynamic that's there.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I don't know too much about the origins of those foods, but certainly fermented foods are great for our bacteria. And I do think, I don't get too spiritual about it, and I don't have fully formed ideas on this, but I think our bodies know intuitively what they want, and it's out there in nature. We can take our guide from nature's steady hand, as it were, in terms of what we should eat. I'm quite keen on intuitive eating, so eating what you feel you need. I think our bodies do tell us. Interestingly, on the whole sort of Mother Nature, however you define that or what you believe, researchers recently discovered there's something in a mother's breast milk that babies can't tolerate. Because that's typically the first dose of microbes from the vaginal canal and then from the breastfeeding. And they couldn't work out why Mother Nature would have put something into breast milk that babies can't tolerate. And then they figured out that it's there to develop the baby's microbiome. That's what it's there for. Now, don't ask me how they figured all that stuff out, but they did.
Because you've got to ask anyone involved in the process and go, what do you think that's doing?
No. Well, I'm sure, a bit of investigative journalism you could, but no, I've no idea. But that's what they discovered. So, yeah, I mean, if you eat natural foods, if you eat, what I say a lot when I present is if our ancestors, if caveman, cavewoman walked in and looked at what was on your plate, would they recognise it? Would they recognise chips and a Cornish pasty or a Scotch egg? No. They'd be perplexed. Would they recognise a chicken breast with vegetables? Yes, they would. So that's often a good rule of thumb with foods. That said, would they recognise fermented foods like sauerkraut, kimchi, kombucha, kefir? Probably not. And we know that they're good for us. So I suppose it's a blend of ancestral wisdom and then using some of the modern stuff that we've got on modern knowledge and blending the two for health.
I'm fascinated by, you talked about tech and using that to develop stuff. And of course, we started by talking about gut and our body telling us what to do. And then the flip side of that is we've obviously got technology that can tell us a load of things that we, maybe sometimes we can detect it, but very often we can't. And that's gone on in leaps and bounds in the past few years in terms of sort of intelligence that I have on my wrist or wherever. How do you integrate that into your processes, and what's your kind of perspective on that, on tech and how it works?
For me personally, I like it as a feed-in. It's a guide. You can't substitute the waking up and thinking, how do I feel? But I do find it useful. I wear something called an Oura ring, and I don't have any affiliation with any product or anything I mention, or I'll let you know, but I don't. We did used to, but I just wear this Oura ring now. It's a great bit of kit. It's about 350 odd euros. It's not a quick pickup, but it gives me a few key bits of data. It gives me my sleep data, so total sleep, and then I look at the breakdown of REM and deep sleep. And then I look also at my HRV, heart rate variability, which, if anyone's unsure what that is a healthy heart has an irregular interbeat interval. So it won't be ba-dum, 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 ba-dum. There'll be tiny, indiscernible without technology, tiny little irregularities in that interbeat interval. And that's an indicator of a healthy nervous system in the main. So you want that number to be fairly high. You want irregularity. So I look at that as well, because it's a really good one number that indicates how the nervous system's doing and how recovered are you from the various stressors that you may be under, whether that's emotional or physical or financial or environmental. So I keep an eye on that. I look at that data. If I've had a really crap night's sleep, I won't look at it. I don't need the device to tell me. Sometimes it will tell me that it wasn't as bad as I thought, because I'll look at the end of the day when I've got everything done. But if it's been really crap, I won't look. So it's a good guide. It's tell you what it's really good for as well. If you're not feeling great, you can look at your body temperature and see if there's a rising trend. It can be used for women to predict their menstrual cycles, because it'll tell you your body temperature is increasing, which has a purpose for fertility. It has a purpose if you just want to know, is my body preparing for that stage of menstruation? It can be quite helpful for that. It can be quite useful to see if you're coming down with something, if your body's starting to fight a virus, you're just feeling a little bit off, but not enough to think I might be getting something. You could check the data. If your HRV is going down and your body temperature is going up, your resting heart rate is going up as well, then that's a good indicator that maybe you're coming down with something. So you could take preemptive action. You could cancel that busy weekend away, or that night on the wines if that's appropriate, or you could just take some stuff out of your diary, thin it out, in anticipation of needing a little bit more rest. So for me personally, that's how I use it. As a company, we'll use the Oura Ring or the First Beat device, which is another bit of Finnish technology. And First Beat is a device that has 2 nodes below the left breast and above the right, for those listening. And it has a wire that connects the two. And it's a 3-day assessment of your nervous system performance. So put crudely, you'll see swathes of green if you're in recovery mode, parasympathetic dominance, and swathes of red if you're sympathetically driven, which might just be hard workout, stress, or just working. And ideally, of course, you want to see a good blend of the 2 in the day and then lots of green at night. So that's a really useful bit of kit as well. And anybody can wear that. It doesn't need to be company sponsored. And they're the 2 things that I would typically rely on, at least for ongoing daily tracking.
And it's always struck me that, we have and I'm probably revealing far too much of myself, but we all have a natural tendency to kind of turn away from bad news, right? So we know that we are positively disposed towards thinking good thoughts. And from an evolutionary perspective, that makes sense, right? You have to believe you're going to survive. So we think good of ourselves, and that plays out how we present ourselves morally. But there is something interesting about shying away from it. The same thing that drives people who are massively in debt not to open credit card bills. And there's something interesting about it. Is your perspective on it? And I was fascinated. I guess what drove the question was, your comment around if I've had a bad night's sleep, and I don't need to dig any deeper into that because I know.
Yeah.
So I'm fascinated by your sort of views on how does, is there such a thing as too much information about our bodies? Will it drive us to change behaviors, or is it generally a good thing?
Well, I think it depends on the personality type. You could definitely have too much data, too much to actually know what practically to do with, which is why I like big headline numbers like HRV. You can also have too much data and that you can get a little bit bent out of shape about it. There's actually a term called orthorexia, or one could be orthorexic, which means you get obsessed with clean living and obsessed with measuring data and getting the good results and the right numbers, inverted commas. I think it very much depends on the type of person. You'll get people who can use the data objectively and those that get too obsessed with it. I did know someone who's a friend of mine who had an Oura Ring, and her partner would say, "How did you sleep?" And she'd say, "Hang on," and download it, sort of up, synchronized to the app, and then say, "Pretty good, yeah." So I think you have to think, what type of person am I? What do I want to get from this data? I use it to preempt anything and just to track my nervous system, because it takes out any guesswork about what might be going on. But nothing really substitutes tuning into yourself, having a few moments where you can think, how do I really feel? A thing I love doing is thinking, if today got cancelled, how would I feel? Flooded with relief. Well, something's up there if that's your typical day.
Right.
So, little measures like that I think are really good as well. Tech is a handrail, if you want to put it like that. It's just a guide.
The bit I loved actually was the predictive element that you'd highlighted, because I had so there's this great quote that says data all comes from one place, the past. And if you take a lot of context, historic data is a really dangerous thing, because whether you want to look at financial investments or you want to just what's going on in the world today, presumptions that we made around the world, if it's based on past data, not necessarily. But there's an interesting predictive element that you've highlighted, which I had never come across before, because I'd always seen trackers track what has happened in my head. But you've just talked about trackers that are kind of, okay, there is an element of projection, but broadly speaking, there's some sort of predictive capabilities there. That's fascinating.
Yeah, and I think that's where it gets really interesting. If I continue with these stressors and with this level of sleep, what is likely to happen to my HRV and my resting heart rate over time? What is happening with my my body temperature? What can that tell me? So, for example, to talk again about menstrual cycles, I'm perimenopausal, which means that periods can come when they can not come, and there's no regularity to it. So it's quite helpful for me to see that increase in body temperature. So I've got some forward notice of it. Normally women would track in cycles. I'm not having a great track of it, to be honest. It's going to come in 3 or 4 weeks and that's that. But, and particularly if you're looking to get pregnant, you keep a very close eye on it. So, that's helpful to know. And then you could say, well, okay, menstruation aside, my body temperature's gone up. What could that be about? Right now, that would be quite a good, seen objectively, early warning sign with COVID lurking around. My body temperature slowly increasing. So that happened, and I wasn't sure why it had increased. So I took my temperature with the thermometer under the arm or in the mouth, I don't remember. It was definitely one of those two, though. And my temperature was absolutely normal. So that just gave me a bit of comfort. A bit of comfort that it wasn't, it wasn't COVID. It wasn't likely to be COVID anyway. And obviously I kept an eye on other stuff. But it was only the increased body temperature in the ring that made me think of it in the first place. There was no cough, no loss of smell or anything else. So, but it prompted me to take my temperature manually.
Wow, that's amazing! Wow, and we'll put links to all of those products, as you say. This is not a formal endorsement, but just in case people want to have a look at them, because I think this is a really interesting space. Whereas I say, I think a lot of people tend to look at kind of thing. I always start from the premise of you can weigh yourself, but again, that's reflective of not what you're about to go and do during the day, but how you have lived your life up until that point. And that's not necessarily helpful for a positive frame of mind.
Yeah.
And I'm fascinated thinking, we talked a little bit around the impact of data and how we use it. I do want to pick up mental health, because I think this is a really interesting topic, because again, we've sort of, we're starting to now talk about it and I don't think we're there yet in terms of all the ways that we should and could be talking about it. But we've come a hell of a long way in a period of time where, it wasn't that long ago where I would be told to man up and just get on with it and stop being so pathetic and get on with life. And actually, we've recognized that even some of the, if you look at it as a sort of sign of macho toughness, even some of the toughest men out there, I mean, PTSD happens to people in the military, right? They're pretty generally tough and resilient people. And so I'm fascinated what your thoughts are on the journey we've gone through, how you see it at the moment, and sort of where you see that, where could that go?
Yeah, I mean, my own personal mental health has changed a lot. I mean, 8.5 years ago now, I was treated for alcoholism. And you've got to say that's a form of ill mental health. Although we tend to think of things like PTSD or bipolar or depression or something like that, but addiction is definitely in there as poor mental health. Aside from the obvious thing of giving up alcohol completely, which I did in March 2012, the sort of things for mental health, I mean, there's a number of different ways of looking at it. I'd say the most powerful thing for improving mental health, and I'm talking really now about stress and possibly anxiety. I mean, mental health is very, very broad, but understanding a bit more about the nervous system, understanding the difference, the autonomic nervous system, which is the sympathetic and the parasympathetic, and how we can move between those two states. That helps you to regain a little bit of control over the nervous system, which definitely helps with stress. Can also help a lot with anxiety, I believe. Other stuff, anything where you can get a little bit more control and mastery over the nervous system, I think is helpful. Also linked with that is having some tools in your kit bag, as it were, to help with changing your emotional soundtrack. So we all have a voice in our head that's saying, Christian, that was good. You are good. Or Christian, that was shit. What's someone going to think of that? Why did you do that? Why do you do it that way? You can do better than that. That was rubbish. We've got that narrative going on, a narrative going on in their heads all the time. And we could consciously change that, not just by thinking positive or walking around with mantras, but that stuff works, but by just changing our physiology. So changing how we view things, our place in the world and events that happen to us and stimulus. And a really powerful way of doing that's meditation. So that's something I've done. Well, it's a non-negotiable, so daily, really, 5, but usually 10 minutes every single day. And it's been very powerful, I think, for being a bit more calm, a bit less reactive. Just sitting still for 10 minutes a day has been really great for mental health. And I think on balance, my mental health is excellent now. I mean, I would say, actually, I don't know if this isn't correct, that it's never been that bad, but I just don't think you can shovel that much booze down your neck every night and say your mental health is good. I don't think you can. So maybe I'm a bit deluded on that point. And there's, when I talk to people about mental health, I talk about using stuff that's freely available to almost anyone anyway, assuming that you are able to walk. A brisk 10-minute walk improves mood and energy for up to 2 hours afterwards. So a study found that. So 2 hours of improved mood and energy off a 10-minute brisk walk. And if you do the 10-minute brisk walk daily for at least 3 weeks, you get an overall improvement in mood and energy. So that's really powerful. And then light as well. Natural light helps to produce serotonin. Serotonin is one of the mood stabilizers within the body. It's something we traditionally thought was in the brain, but I think most of it's in the gut. The rest is in the brain. And depression was thought to be a lack of serotonin, but there's some very good work recently been done to say that actually it's far more about biopsychosocial factors than it is about a lack of brain serotonin. And there's a really good book that I'd recommend for you and your listeners, if they've not read it, called Lost Connections by Johann Hari. He's a journalist. It's a very, very good book. And he talks about the cause of anxiety and depression and kind of says it's a little bit about genetics and it's a little bit about serotonin, but actually it's far more about your environment, how you grow up, who you're around, your outlook on life, the physical environment you're in. It's really worth a read. Some really interesting ideas.
And that's fascinating because it's I'll be honest, it's one of those ones that's in my pile of books to be read. So I feel chastised into reading that now, which is great. So thank you for that recommendation again. We'll stick that in there. We'll stick that in the show notes there. But I'm really struck as you talk about these sort of things because all of the solutions come back to sort of things that feel natural. So we're not designed for sitting on a chair all day. We're probably not designed for the level of information that we have thrust at us on a daily basis, particularly when we're sitting in front of a screen where that is literally limitless. So there's a lot of processes that you've talked about that are sort of natural solutions, stuff that our ancestors would have just done in ordinary course. And I find that really fascinating because it all comes back to, and I, in the basic kind of human risk pieces, I kind of go, I think we are trying to control something in the human brain in ways that don't fully appreciate how it operates. And many of the things the environments that we've built as we've got more quote unquote civilized actually cause us tremendous problems in terms of our mental health and our physical health and all these pieces. And we're not really suited for the environment that we've designed.
No, I don't think we are really. I mean, I think we have junk values as well. The things that we value, and this is a generalization, but are more about goods and things, status symbols and stuff. And the cost of that is enormous to the environment. The cost of that to wildlife is huge. So I just think the things we value are all wrong in the main. We should value connection, human life. We should value the environment. We should value the animals in it. One of the things that makes me incredibly sad is the way that we've industrialized and the way we treat animals. Literally, it's a conveyor belt of chickens going around, and it's awful. And what may happen when we Brexit as well with regards to animals. But I don't want to make it political, but it really saddens me what we've done there. And I think the things that we value come at such a cost. And I'm not perfect. One of the things I want to work on next is the amount of stuff I buy on Amazon, because that's definitely not good for the environment. But then, the delivery that came just now is farm drop. That's where you buy as a meat eater. it's a step before the stopping eating meat step, where I know that the animals have been reared in a humane way. They've had a good life. You get all the information about the farm through the farm drop service. And again, I've got no affiliation with them. That stuff is important to me. But I think generally, we have junk values. And yes, we forced ourselves into an environment that's pretty unhealthy. Some of us are living right underneath each other. Other people are isolated. I don't want to bash tech because it's enabling us to have this conversation. It kept people connected during lockdown. It's important and it's here to stay. But the general pace of life feels to me to be too fast as well, that we're working people into burnout states. We're having people, one podcast guest of mine described it as free-range people.
I love that.
Yeah, that's what we describe.
I don't love to be clear, I don't love the concept. I love the depiction.
Yeah, because we're like battery hens sitting in these banks of offices in Canary Wharf. But the lockdowns happened, and we're still at time of recording where we're almost at the end of September. We're far from out of the woods. And we've had this enforced experiment on home working, and for the vast majority of people, it's worked. It may not be ideal, but it has worked. Companies can see that people aren't skipping off down the pub or the golf course. Apart from me, those two things weren't possible. But, we were able to work productively and fruitfully from home, and happily for some of us. So maybe we can redefine the way that we do work. I'd love to see that as a fallout from the whole COVID, is we can redefine how we want to do work. And as individuals, we also need to seize that opportunity. Don't wait for your employer to say, right, let's have a virtual all hands and talk about how we can redefine how we do work, because they'll be trying to recover and get the revenues up again. But we as individuals can say, well, what really worked for me in lockdown? What did I enjoy about it? So as I may contemplate a return to the office in the future, what do I want to keep hold of? That early morning PT session, or minimizing the commute, flexing my hours so I'm not packed on a train with others, insisting on some work from home time, making sure that I get up and I move around and I have a standing desk at work, and I do what I call movement snacking, which is sneaking a few little reps of an exercise in across the day so that it's a workout when you add it up, but it doesn't feel like one. All that kind of stuff. People had some really good. They spent more time with family. They may have spent more time in natural light. How can we hold on to that and redefine how we individually do our work?
And I think it's really interesting when you sort of talk in those terms, around employers and the presumptions on employees. And there's been lots of articles about spyware, and there was a lovely piece I read at the weekend, which was somebody talking about, we're seeing dinosaur companies who are, suddenly you don't have control over your employees because they're not in the office anymore. So I need to double check. So I'm going to put software on their machines that spies on them and monitors them. And I think it's really fascinating because one of the things I look at that and go, I can see where they're coming from, but it's making a sort of really interesting presumption around human capital and what it's there for, why you've hired it. And I would say, look, if you've hired someone to be a security guard to cover certain hours, or to man a checkout between certain hours, then of course the exact times that they do it becomes critical. And there are lots of really people doing that we started to realize now, really, really important roles where it is about physical presence and it's about the time that you do the role. But for lots of other people, and particularly those people that are able to work from home, there's a bit more flexibility around it. And so I think it's really interesting as we see what is the value of human productivity. It's not about having a bum on a seat between hours X and hours Y. It's about what you get out of them doing their job. And I found it fascinating working for myself. If I want to have a nap in the, I don't do it if I've got a client assignment, live client webinar with someone or something, or a meeting. Right? I just go, I'm sorry now, this is my afternoon nap time, I'm done. But I find it fascinating, if I'm feeling a bit knackered, I stop working because that's not getting the most out of me.
Yeah.
And I think there's something really amazing about, and there's a sense of agency, and there's a little bit of me that loves it because I go, I can do this and I'm going to enjoy every second of it. A little bit like, and clearly I would never have done this, but I remember in the old days, people used to tell me stories about, if you could bunk off work and go to the cinema in the afternoon, that was the ultimate statement of control, because you'd basically committed to going to 2 to 3 hours to sit somewhere where they couldn't get hold of you and you were running. And if you got away with that, that felt really good, right? That was a major, as opposed to bunking off for half an hour to go to the gym or whatever. That felt like an act of rebellion. I wouldn't dream, ignore COVID, I wouldn't dream of doing that now because it's taking money away from myself. Or if I was doing it, I'd just be able to justify. But I love this idea of having a sense of autonomy and control. And back to your, reading your own body and mind. And I think it's really interesting that now people have started to get that sense. You do have that little bit more autonomy. You have assuming you've got a reasonable amount of personal space at home, and I appreciate lots of people don't. You can pick where you work. You can move around. So there's a degree of control around your environment that I think is quite uplifting. And I'm going to be fascinated to see, as you say, because I don't think it's going to be revolutionary and nothing will be the way it was when this is all over. But I think there will be some fundamental, and I wonder whether that sense of agency and control, I think, is really important that you've depicted.
Yeah, I think forward-thinking companies will recognise this. Agency, autonomy, same thing. Variety as well, and you get more variety when you're not spending a lot of time commuting and so on. I think forward-thinking companies, game-changing companies will recognise this, and they will make sure these things are well known, and they'll use it as a way of attracting talent into the business and retaining the talent they have. There'll be other things that they think about as well, like really robust wellbeing strategies, providing people with resources and a toolkit that they can access that helps them to manage their wellbeing. I also think they'll differentiate by being very proactive. So a lot of companies are great at the reactive. They've got really good employee assistance programs, really good occupational health. They're really good at sending out a search party as soon as the horse is bolted. But what we need is to have a really bloody good set of locks on the barn door so the horse doesn't bolt in the first place. So very proactive resources that help to keep people well. So there'll be lots of companies that are doing that, and those dinosaur companies you refer to will, I think, just ebb away. They just won't be able to compete because now more than ever, wellbeing is right up there on companies' agendas. Some are paying lip service still, what I call fruit bowl wellbeing, which is a moot point now anyway. Because, if you run a company of 500 people and you thought a fruit bowl would do it, that's 500 fruit bowls you're sending out. So you can't do that anymore. It's about taking it really seriously and not paying lip service. And some companies are, some aren't. We've seen in my business a huge uptake, a speed up in the sales cycle, and more prospects coming into the pipeline quite considerably. So we're definitely seeing this shift in people's mindsets.
And I love that depiction of sort of, we put things in place for when it happens. And we don't, so it's sort of like, and it starts, and we better have something to deal with that. In the same way that, we better make sure that if this particular issue goes wrong with our operations, that we can fix it, right? We have a repair person who can fix this thing, or an IT. And I think it's interesting that as you look at diversity and an attempt to get sort of, a broader range of people in so you can get smarter thinking and smarter ideas, I think this, it's really interesting. You spend a ton of money on, and people tend to be one of the largest costs of most organizations. Yeah. You spend all this money on that bit. And there is no attempt to sort of stem it. It's like, well, if it happens, we'll know. We'll deal with it when it happens. And I think that's part of the stuff gets hidden because you only see it when it's really big. Mm. And if you've got these kind of fake structures where it's like, call our employee helpline, if that's the only thing you've done is a sort of phone number for people. Yeah. It sends. I think it's really interesting because it sends a clear signal that it's like, oh, we've got this thing. And maybe you put some signs up on the back of cubicle doors in the toilets in the old world. And that was sort of, we've dealt with that, so they know what to do if there's a problem. And I think it's fascinating that you're not looking at, as you would do if it was another business problem, going, how do we stop this from happening in the first place preemptively? Yeah. And it struck me that actually we can learn quite a bit from sports. If you look at, say football, they spend millions on players. And then they really do look after them now. And they've got to that stage where it's not only the physical health, they make sure they're not doing stupid financial things because they recognize that has an impact on the pitch. And I think this mindset around how clubs protect sports people, different salary scales, different challenges, different whatever, but I think the human component's the same. I think there's a lovely thing there that you've just depicted, which is if organizations could get on top of this issue, you'd have much less of a problem that you are trying to manage. Mm-hmm. And actually the results would be phenomenal in terms of the productivity and the quality of the ideas. And if you've hired people for their brains, then you need to kind of nurture that and maximize it.
Mm. Yeah, I think you're right. It does come down to giving people agency and autonomy as well. I think that's a really huge part. Another underappreciated aspect of well-being is giving people autonomy, letting them get on with the job. And another leap we need to make is output-based performance. So it's less about hours. You've alluded to it as well. It's less about hours. It's about getting the job done. And one of the things that I would find incredibly difficult if I had to go back to a traditional role, and I do mean incredibly difficult, would be those conventional hours. Because if you've gone off the boil and it's 12:30, you've got to sit there, which is what I used to do, sit there until I can see 1,700 hours on the bottom right-hand corner of my screen where that little clock is. And then I can toodle off. And until then, I've got to look busy. And if anyone comes over, make sure I've clicked off the screen, and it's just painful. Now, if I'm off the boil, I mean, obviously, if I'm not feeling as energized as I might be, and I've got something coming up, I'll go out and move around, take a walk and get G'd up for it. But typically, I look at the diary and I think that's how long my energy needs to be sustained for. I'm good for that. But if I have gone off the boil and it's me in the office doing stuff, I'll just come home. I'll do something else and I'll pick it up when I've gone back on the boil. And that sense of autonomy is so empowering, so important. And talking about napping, actually, and I've mentioned I'm perimenopausal. It hasn't happened since I bought it, but I thought if we've moved to slightly bigger offices because they're quieter, and of course everything's online now, I bought the sofa bed with the blanket and thought if I do, because my energy it becomes much more volatile in a perimenopause, or it can do. But if I get a dip in energy, I'll just go over there and lie down for half an hour and then get back up and crack on. And then you could do that in an office. You could have sleep pods where people can just go in and close their eyes for 15 minutes and it not be a big deal. But there's, I think, a little bit of a way to go with most companies in terms of that.
But there's something interesting there about, we all know that feeling, right? So regardless of how fit and healthy you are, there are going to be days where you're feeling a bit off, a bit knackered, a bit whatever. And so I think it's really interesting that we've kind of, in the same way that sort of man up, we didn't get what in my day, blah, blah, all those sort of nonsense statements about how let's move on. Let's not have the discussion about it. Similar the Victorian discussion about sex, same thing. Let's not have these discussions because it's a bit difficult, a bit awkward. And I just sort of looking at it, well, the stupid thing here is we all intuitively know that we can get knackered, we can be pissed off, there's always like you'll be off the boil, whatever. And actually, that is exactly what you do when you're in control of the situation. Go have a nap, right? It's literally, tell Frank, go have a lie down, right? It's sort of, that's in our vocabulary. And yet somehow in the work environment, can't possibly do that because it's unprofessional. I mean, I would argue it's unprofessional to rock up to a meeting if you're knackered, if you had the opportunity to get some rest. Which of those two things is more unprofessional? And it's very clear. But yet the traditional wisdom is like, we can't talk about this thing. So I think, as you were talking, I was like reflecting, I think this is really interesting, because if we can be more honest about stuff like this, in the same way that we need to be more honest about mental health issues, all of a sudden actually having this is what I love about Japan. They sit in meetings and close their eyes because they want to be able to listen. You close your eyes in the UK, somebody thinks you're sleeping. There, it's like that helps them focus. Yeah. And I thought, it freaks you out if you don't know what they're doing, because you go, am I really that boring? But I love that idea, which is just recognizing that you don't want to overpollute the senses. Sight doesn't help them in that context, whereas listening does.
Yeah, sleep's an interesting one, which we won't have time to go into, but Arianna Huffington did a TED talk to a group of women, and the nickname for the talk was Why Women Are Sleeping Their Way to the Top. Basically, what she was saying is that women in general there's less machoism about sleep, they're getting more sleep, and they're making better rational decisions. Obviously, it's a gross generalization and a bit tongue-in-cheek. And that's why we're seeing the icebergs before they hit the Titanic, and she's referencing 2008. She then talks about how she was having lunch with this guy in New York where sleep apparently is very, we don't need to do that. And the guy said, well, what time do you want to meet? And she says, at 8. And he was like, 8 in the morning. He's like, it's a little late for me, but I guess I could do some emails, play some tennis. Yeah, let's meet at 8. Another guy she was having dinner with who was boasting about how little sleep he got. And he was saying got a 4 hours sleep the night before. And she was thinking but didn't say, well, if you'd just gotten an extra 2 hours, this dinner would have been a lot more interesting. It's a good talk, and I'll send you the link if you like. She's making a serious point, but via quips and obviously generalising in terms of the genders. But she was talking to a group of women.
Yeah, but I love that, because the city that never sleeps, right, is interesting, because that genuinely. So I think Frank Sinatra meant it in an entertainment sense, right? You can always get a drink, you can always get well, but that's a really interesting way of looking at it. That plays into kind of the machismo culture of, sleep is for wimps, and I'm just here to push on through and do deals and make business. I think that's really interesting. Wow. Yeah. What a lovely note on which to round things. Listen, I could continue this conversation forever because it's been fascinating, but thank you so much. If people want to get hold of you, how can they find you?
So Leanne Spencer 1975 on LinkedIn, and my website is bodyshotperformance.com. Everything's on there. Yeah, they would be the two best places. My podcast is called Remove the Guesswork. It's just 10 minutes a week as well, where I talk about, I've talked about meditation recently. I can't remember what the last one was. 5 ways to stay active while you're working from home. So that might be of interest. Different vibe to yours completely, but might be of interest.
Brilliant. Well, look, thank you so much for being on the podcast, and thank you for just providing so many different avenues of things for people to think about. I'm now going to check out some of those gadgets. We'll put links to all of those things in the podcast. But Leanne, thank you so much for being on the Human Risk Podcast.
It's a pleasure, Christian. Thank you very much. Thanks for listening.
So that's it for another episode of the Human Risk Podcast. My enormous thanks to Leanne for joining and to you for listening. To find out more about Leanne's podcast and her book, you can check out the show notes where there's also a link to her website. If this is your first time listening to the Human Risk Podcast, welcome. You can subscribe to it wherever you get your quality audio content. I'll be back very soon with another episode of the show, but in the meantime, stay safe and thanks for listening.